I'm Roby, and those days I'm staying in Dunlang, and I have a room with a beautiful view. I show you. This is my view from my room, and you can see the very high bridge over the Dunlang River, and under the clouds there are the mountains, the High Fan Pass, and so on. It's really very beautiful view. So where is Dunlang? I know that, of course, but not everybody knows, so I take the card of Vietnam, and then you see here is Hanoi in the north, and Ho Chi Minh City is in the south, and exact in the middle is Da Nang. And Hanoi is famous as a cultural city. Ho Chi Minh is famous for its economic, and Da Nang is famous for when you ask people from the north or from the south, do you like Da Nang? They always will say, yes, we love Da Nang. And then when you ask why, they will look around and ask this, yeah, why? And then they say, well, because it's Da Nang. That's true, Da Nang. So the other day, I thought I want to be on that high bridge there, and I take my motorbike and then drive up, take my little camera, and then I will make a short video of the river and where it mounts into the sea. So that's what you can see now on the screen. I start with the Dunlang Bridge. It was very far away, and it was very difficult to film because besides a lot of traffic crossing me, there was a lot of wind on the bridge, so I almost blow away from the bridge. But it's very interesting because there was a reason why I wanted to see it, to be there. You see, those days the Viet are ruling Da Nang, and for the last few centuries they were ruling Da Nang. But before the Viet, there were the Cham, and the Cham, those were the ones who were supposed to give the name to Da Nang. They called it Da Nang, and Da Nang, it's the river mouth. And here you see the river mouth. It's really very beautiful when the sun is on, and on the other side you see the mountains and the boats there. It's so interesting. But before the Cham, there were already some very interesting culture in Da Nang. It's the Sa Huỳnh culture. And we're talking now already about several thousand years, 3,000–4,000 years ago. And the Sa Huỳnh, it was a culture, and they were very famous for their metal works. In Dong Song in the north, they were famous for the bronze and the drums and things like that. The Sa Huỳnh, they were famous for the jewelry. They have this kind of very special jewelry. You can see it a little bit with the two things. But you can see those ones. I made a picture in the Dunlang Museum, and this is the Dunlang Museum. So you can go there. Today, those days, it's often for free, and when it's for free, they do not put on all the lights because it's too expensive. So it's a little bit dark, but also very interesting to see. They have more things of the Sa Huỳnh culture. And one of the things that was most impressive of the Sa Huỳnh culture are the jars. They make the terracotta jars to bury their dead. Near Da Nang, you have a lot of clay, and that clay is very, very good for making terracotta tiles, bricks, jars, pottery, a lot of that. And those jars, they are really very special because in those days, we're talking about 3,000–4,000 years ago, it was not used to bury your dead in a jar. So when you Google and you put jar fields, because I saw a picture over there where an excavation where they of those Sa Huỳnh jars. And when you see this picture, and then you go to Google and you Google jar fields, then you got so many pictures of jar fields. But those are not from the Sa Huỳnh. Those are the jar fields in the Lao highlands. And that's something very striking. Because, you see, the Sa Huỳnh, they were, the heyday of them were about 3,000 years ago to 2,000 years ago. The jar fields in Laos, they are created 2,500 years ago. In the time that Sa Huỳnh was very, very famous, and not a little bit, they were really very famous. They were exporting their products to from the Philippines to Taiwan, to China, all over Vietnam, of course. And the high fields of Laos, they are not that far. Here are the high fields where they found the thing, and here is Dunlang. You can see it's a straight road, but they also could go by sea. And they really did. Even today, there's a lot of Lao people. They go to Dunlang, to the market there, very often. It's very nice. And a lot of foreigners in Vietnam, they go there to the border of Laos to get an extension of their visa. So there is a big communication. And it's for me a bit strange that they say they don't know where the Lao people got the ideas for those jar fields. And then I think, yeah, well, when Sa Huỳnh is so famous, and they had those jar fields, and they were very unique. And then suddenly, 500 to 800 years later, you see also the same kind of jar fields. Well, not in terracotta, but in other material, but that's not important. They also the same size, also to bury people in. I think there might be a link between, because when you look around, then you see that in the north of Vietnam, they didn't use this kind of jars. They dig very deep hole, and then they put their deceased, and then they put also some expensive things in it, and also they found also big bones. And maybe you think, big, why is it big? Well, the deceased need important things for their next life. And the big bones, that's not that strange, because you know, the last 100 years the Vietnamese are using the Latin letters, but before that, for 2,000 years, they used logographic writing, and they even had their own logographic writing. It's called Trung. And when you want to know the history of words, you have to go back through the Trung or the logographic writing to find the history of a word. And in Vietnam, the word for house, for being safe at home, it's nha. And when you go back in the characters to see them, then you see a development back that groups, and the original character is a pig under a roof. Pigs were incredibly important in that time. So, but let's go back to Đà Nẵng, and we are in the 2nd century. And at the 2nd century, the Cham came to Vietnam. Well, that's not that strange. When you look at Vietnam, you see a lot of coasts, and there was a lot of traffic from India and other countries to China, and they didn't like to go in the middle of the sea. They always kept on the coast, so when there suddenly was a storm or something like that, they could go easily find a safe harbor. And that's why they found many places where they just stayed. And some, like the Cham, they just stayed there and they founded their own kingdom. And you can see a lot, because that kingdom was incredibly rich. They had beautiful statues, beautiful temples. The temples you still can see in Mison, and the statues, all those things, you can see in the Dunlang Museum. And that's easy to find, because here is the Dragon Bridge, the one you saw on the video I made, and opposite it's the Cham Museum. And that's a very interesting museum. When you enter it, one of the first things you see are those statues of elephants. They are all have special names, and I'm not going to tell you because you have to go yourself there to see them. It's so imposing. When I went there, it was also for free, so there was no light, so that's why it's a little bit darker. But still you can see how imposing those elephants are. And those elephants, that's a very interesting thing, because we saw already in my previous video the Ibatung riding on their elephants, and that was typical in Vietnam. They have many elephants, and very big elephants with a lot of things on it, and then they were accompanying troops. Today we will say a convoy. It is a strange thing, because convoy, it's in Dutch convoy, it's in Spanish convoy, it's in English convoy. It's a little bit strange that it's almost like television. That's also everywhere the same, except in Germany. So, but why is it, where does that word come from? And when we go back there, we find that in the first mention of the word convoy, in the meaning of a troop with some big trucks and other vehicles to protect the troop, it's come in 1570, something like that, in the French language. And that's something to think about, because when you ask a Vietnamese, those big things there, what are they? They will say convoy. Because elephants, they are named convoy. And when you realize that the Portuguese and the Spanish priests, they came maybe 1530 or something like that, for the first time in Vietnam, in Hoi An and near Da Nang, and then they saw those big elephants protecting the troops, and they must have written about that. And then you will have, oh yeah, they have a convoy. They had no idea. And convoy, it's also in Latin, it means together or something like that. But it's striking that before 1500, the Latin was very popular, but they never had that word convoy with the same meaning as after they visit Vietnam and they saw the convoy, the big elephants protecting those troops. So that's really interesting, I think. But when we go a few centuries back about the Cham, in the north we had the tram. At that time, well, in 900, around that time, the Chinese were defeated because the Vietnamese, they are very smart sometimes. They had a war on the Back River, and there's this is an old drawing about that, and then you see how the Vietnamese are defeating the Chinese with a really funny trick, but that's for another story. In each case, at the end of the 13th century, there was the invincible Mongolian army. They invaded in Vietnam, and to discover that they were not invincible, they just stepped into the same trick as the Chinese army a few centuries before them, and then they were... So at that time, the Viet King, Trang Hang Trung, he get a little bit tired of fighting, and he thought maybe we should make peace with our southern neighbors, the Cham. So he thought, I go to Da Nang, have a short talk with the Cham king, and well, so he did. So he thought, I go for a few days in Da Nang, but once he was in Da Nang, a few days became a few weeks, and a few weeks became a few months. That happens with people who visiting Da Nang. So was very nice altogether. And then he said to the sorry, to the Cham king, Yaya Maraman, the third, listen, we should be friends and I will give you my daughter as wife. That was in those days, they always did something like that. You know, they had many sons, and the sons, they had to kill each other, and the one who left over become the new king. And the daughters, they were considered as a kind of relation gift, so they give away to become family and friends with each other. So the Cham king, he was quite old, but he thought, well, it's a nice idea to have a beautiful young Vietnamese girl as my new wife. So he said, okay, good. And then the Cham king, he went back home and he told his daughter, and his daughter said, I'm not so interested. So, okay, who cares? So life went on for a time, but the Cham king, he get a little bit upset, and then he said, listen, when you send your daughter, I marry her, and then I will give you 2 white elephants. Wow, the Cham king told, wow, white elephant, because white elephants were very rare and very special. The Cham king didn't know what we know now, but in the past, it was the king of Siam. He started with giving white elephants as gift, because then they said, oh, they're so happy with the white elephant. But after a while, they discovered that white elephants, they are incredibly difficult to keep, and they cost a lot of money, and there's always problems with white elephants. So the Cham king at that time, he didn't know that, and he thought, oh, nice, I got that. So he sent his daughter to the Cham king. Old king, old man, married, very young Vietnamese girl. Well, you know how it goes with old men and young girls. A year later, the king died. No relation, of course. But at that time, I talked about the Sa Huỳnh people. They bury the deceased in jars and make jars. Feels very nice. In the north, they dig very deep graves and they put. But the Cham king, they had another cultural habit. That was that when the king dies, for his next life, he also did not only food and weapons and all this kind of things. He also need all his wife. And the Cham women, they are very beautiful also, but they are just, okay, that's my life. So, yeah. It's not what I dreamed about, but yeah, so they will die, will be buried with the king. But the Vietnamese, Nguyen Tran, the princess, she wasn't interested in that part of the Cham culture. So what she did was she disappeared. And yeah, the Cham were not happy about that. And so they start to make problems. But in the north, the Trang dynasty had other problems, because this time the Minh invaded in Vietnam, and then we got Le Loi. You remember the one with the sword from the Hoàng Kim Lake. He defeated the Minh army, and at that time the Trang, well, already the 5th Trang, Li Trang Tong, I believe, he thought, I go with my army to the Cham and I will get my white elephants there, because Nguyen Tran has married him, and there is no notition that those white elephants ever came in the north. So he went to Da Nang. Some part of his army came by boat, and the other went by feet. And between Hue and Da Nang, there are mountains, very high mountains. And there is an old Buddhist saying that says, first there is mountain, But when you climb on it, then there is no mountain anymore. And that sounds a little bit poetic and things like that. But everybody who has climbed from where the Hai Van Pass, and I can imagine that army 400 years ago, 500 years ago, they also they should drink also, of course. I should also have some water, but I didn't do that. I forgot that. So they were up and up, and it's a long road to the Hai Van Pass, to the top. But once you're on the top, you understand the saying of the Buddhist saying, once you're on the top, there is no mountain. Because that's the reality. When you're on the top of the Hai Van Pass, there is a breathtaking view, but no mountains. The only thing you see is the sea, you see the beaches, you see monkeys jumping, you see the big Dunlang River. It's all so incredibly beautiful. You smell the nuoc mam, because in Danang they make very good nuoc mam. So that's something, you never forget that. That's a breathtaking view that it's famous, not only in Vietnam. So they went down, and then no white elephants. So instead of the white elephants, they thought, okay, then we take over the city, the capital of the Cham, and we make it a Viet place. So since then, the Viet are ruling Da Nang. And then he went back, the king, to the north. And then it was not long, just a bit later, he heard that the Lao king had the white elephant. And then the king told, wait a moment, and he sent a message to the Lao king. He said, well, when you have the white elephants, I would love to have a few of the hairs of the elephants. And the Lao king, something like that, instead of the hairs, he sent some faces. And when the Trang king saw that, he became so angry, and he said, well, my army is still packed. We go to Lao, and they did. And then that was the White Elephant War between Lao and Vietnam. And there were a lot of dead there, so lucky they had also a lot of jar fields. But it's all a very interesting story. And there is also something interesting in Vietnam, that most children, and of course most Vietnamese, they know a lot about their history. And one of the reasons is that when you're in Vietnam, you will see the street names and you might think, yeah, or something like that. You have no idea what it is. But the reality is that streets are almost always named after heroes from the past. Like, for example, this is the Pho Hai Ba Trung. And I think I made this picture in Vinh, I think. So that's what they do. And that's when children walk around and where do you live? I live in the Hai Ba Trung. And then who's Hai Ba Trung? And then oh, there's another story. That's how they keep on their ancestors. And then every month they also a little altar, and then they pipe by and they make very interesting things. And for the Princess Nguyen Tran in Da Nang, they had a special street. It's not something, and they didn't make a simple sign. No, they make marble steel, and this is the street. And it's so interesting because you can imagine when you're standing there that the princess was going in the street and disappearing in the mountains, in the forested mountains. So, well, that's a little bit about Da Nang. And I think now I have to drink something, and then I will go out to have some street food, because Da Nang is very famous for its street food. See you next time.